They say the guillotine was swift, merciful, almost gentle compared to the storms that came before it. But for Marie Antoinette, the blade was not a punishment. It was a release. Because for 76 days, long before the crowds gathered to watch her die, the revolutionaries did something far more calculated, far more intimate, and far more cruel. They tried to unmake her. Not the queen, not the symbol, but the woman. They stripped her of sleep, privacy, identity, even motherhood. They turned her own child into a weapon, her own memories into torment, her own silence into a prison. And as Paris screamed for more blood, its leaders designed a new kind of execution, one that killed the spirit long before it touched the flesh. By the time she stepped toward the guillotine, pale and trembling under the Parisian sun, Marie Antoinette was not walking to her death. She was escaping the final stage of a nightmare that history rarely speaks of. This is not the story of how a queen died. It is the story of how they tried to break her, piece by piece, before the blade ever fell. For the revolutionaries, suffering wasn't a side effect of justice, it was policy. In 1793, as France tore itself apart with fear and fury, the newly empowered leaders created an unwritten principle whispered through prison corridors and political chambers alike. Break the body, and the mind will follow. Marie Antoinette, once the most scrutinized woman in Europe, became the perfect test subject for this doctrine. To the public, she was the foreigner who ruined France. To the Committee of Public Safety, she was a symbol that had to be dismantled carefully, deliberately, and publicly. Not killed outright. Not yet. First, she had to be reduced. The law of pain worked in stages. Isolation came first, small restrictions, subtle cruelties concealed beneath the language of security. Her meals were cut in half. Her candlelight ration reduced. Her movements monitored. Her most basic human needs transformed into privileges she had to ask for. Every request reminded her of what she no longer was. Not a queen, not a mother in control, not even a woman with the right to close her eyes without someone watching. And as the days passed, her jailers noted the effects like physicians observing an experiment. Her appetite faded. Her posture weakened. Her voice cracked when she spoke her children's names. This wasn't accidental. It was the first step, to weaken her enough that the next act of cruelty would strike at the very core of her being. When they were certain the law of pain had softened her spirit, they moved to the stage that would haunt her until her final breath. The revolutionaries didn't need iron hooks or medieval devices to torment Marie Antoinette. They created something far more effective. A psychological hook, crafted with precision, designed to lodge itself so deeply into her mind that it tore at her every waking moment. This hook was not metal. It was absence. They realized quickly that physical punishment would win her sympathy. But emotional deprivation, carefully measured, expertly applied, could break her in ways no dungeon ever had. So they began shaping a new method, one meant not to wound the body, but to puncture the heart. The first version of this hook took the form of constant observation. 2 guards were placed inside her chambers, not outside, inside day and night. She was never alone. Not while eating. Not while sleeping. Not even when she bowed her head to pray. Privacy, something she had always taken for granted, became a memory. Every movement she made was witnessed. Every tear documented. Every breath recorded. The second version of the hook, involved removing her from the life she understood. The music she once enjoyed, the letters she once sent, the familiar language of her childhood. Gone. French only, no exceptions. Even with her children. They stripped away her identity not with blades, but with silence. But the most devastating hook, the one they spent weeks preparing, was built around the one truth they learned early in her imprisonment. Marie Antoinette could endure humiliation. She could survive isolation. She could withstand hunger. But she could not endure losing her children. The hook was ready. They would not use it right away. They would wait until the exact moment she was weakest. And then with cold precision, they would pull it. They didn't need a scaffold, a crowd, or a blade to perform the first execution. Because long before Marie Antoinette's own death was scheduled, the revolutionaries carried out an execution of a different kind. One designed not to end her life, but to shatter it. It began the night they came for her youngest child. It was late, too late for official orders, too late for visitors, too late for anything except fear. Marie Antoinette had finally coaxed 8-year-old Louis Charles into sleep, his small hand curled inside hers, as if afraid she might disappear in the night. Her daughter, Marie Therese, was only a room away. For a brief moment, the tower was quiet. Then came the boots. Heavy, slow, deliberate. The door burst open, and 6 guards flooded the room with torches, the flames shaking as if even the fire feared the moment. An officer stepped forward holding a sealed decree, an order from the Committee of Public Safety. They had come for her son. The reaction was instantaneous and primal. Marie Antoinette transformed from a silent prisoner into a mother fighting for the last piece of her soul. She threw herself in front of the guards, shielded her son with her body, and screamed with a voice that hadn't been heard since the fall of Versailles. For 1 full hour she resisted. She sobbed, pleaded, begged them to take her instead. She clung to the boy so tightly that he woke up trembling, confused, crying into her dress. The guards threatened. They warned. They raised their voices. Still she refused. But resistance in the temple was hopeless. The revolutionaries didn't need her permission. They needed her pain. And eventually, exhausted, shaking, forced to choose between terror and violence, she broke. They pried the child from her arms, dragged him out the door, down the tower stairs, into the darkness. His screams echoed back to her, small, frightened, desperate, until they faded into nothing. In that moment, something inside her died. A quiet, invisible execution. Not of the queen, not of the prisoner, but of the mother. And that, the revolutionaries knew, was only the beginning. When the tower door shut that night, the silence didn't feel like silence at all. It felt like a wound, raw, open, throbbing. Marie Antoinette sat on the cold stone floor long after her son's screams had vanished, her hands still trembling from the force she had used to hold him. For the first time since the revolution began, she no longer knew how to breathe. The next morning, the prison routine resumed as if nothing had happened. Meals arrived. Guards rotated. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. But something fundamental had shifted. Marie Antoinette was still alive, but she was no longer whole. It wasn't the physical conditions that broke her. It was the emptiness. Every corner of the room, where her son used to sleep, stabbed at her with memory. The pillow that still carried the shape of his small head. the blanket she had tucked around him the night before, the tiny wooden cup he used for meals. Everything became a reminder of the moment she failed to protect him. And the guards saw it. They watched her pace the room at night, whispering her children's names into the darkness. They heard her call out softly, as if he might return. They saw her sit for hours with her hands pressed against her face, trying not to cry where they could see. But they didn't offer sympathy. They offered reports. Every tear, every sleepless hour, every moment of collapse was written down and sent to the Committee of Public Safety. Proof that the experiment was working. Meanwhile, in another part of the prison, the boy they had taken from her was being remade into a weapon. They taught him to curse his mother. They punished him if he hesitated. He was a child, and children break quickly. Marie Antoinette didn't know the details, but she felt them. A mother's intuition doesn't need evidence, only absence. And just as she started to adapt to this new, unbearable silence, the revolutionaries delivered the next blow. They moved her to the conciergerie, the final stop before execution. This time she didn't scream. She didn't fight. She didn't plead. She simply lowered her head and walked. Not because she was brave. Not because she surrendered. But because the worst part of her had already been taken, and the rest of her was just waiting to follow. To understand the torment unfolding inside the conciergerie, you have to understand one thing the revolutionaries feared most. Symbols. Marie Antoinette wasn't just a prisoner. She was a reminder of everything France wanted to erase: monarchy, privilege, foreign influence, the old world. And history had already shown what could happen when a symbol, cornered and humiliated, suddenly became powerful again. The leaders of the revolution remembered the story of Münster, a German city that decades earlier had fallen under the rule of rebels who declared themselves a new divine order. The world had mocked them at first, dismissed them as broken, scattered, leaderless. But desperation can create miracles. Within months, Münster transformed into a fortress of fanatic loyalty. All because its people rallied around a single face, a single voice, a single symbol they believed embodied their suffering. That uprising terrified European rulers for years. And it terrified the revolutionaries now. Because standing in a cold cell beneath Paris was a woman who, no matter how far she had fallen, still carried the potential to ignite sympathy and rebellion. Not as a queen, but as a mother ripped from her children. The parallels frightened them. A grieving mother could inspire a nation the same way Münster's zealots once had. A woman stripped of dignity could become a martyr. And a martyr was far more dangerous than any monarch. So in the conciergerie, they tightened the restrictions even further. 2 guards stationed inside her cell at all times. No privacy, not even behind the folding screen they pretended was for her comfort. No letters sent or received. No contact with anyone, except the men assigned to watch her deteriorate. They monitored her days as if awaiting a spark. Any sign she might regain strength, defiance, or hope. Because hope was dangerous. Hope was contagious. Hope had once turned Münster into a rebellion that shook Europe. They couldn't allow Marie Antoinette to become another symbol. So they starved her spirit, isolated her mind, and dragged her closer to a place where even memory felt like treason. She wasn't waiting for death. She was surviving it, slowly, quietly, piece by piece. By the time October arrived, the conciergerie had done what no battlefield, no mob, no court of Europe had ever managed to do. It had reduced Marie Antoinette to something smaller than a prisoner, smaller even than a queen stripped of power. It had turned her into a symbol without a voice. Her appearance shocked even those who despised her. Her hair, once styled in elaborate coils, had gone completely white, brittle as ash. Her cheeks were hollow, her eyes swollen from sleepless nights, her skin almost translucent from starvation and stress. She moved slowly, carefully, as though each step risked breaking something inside her. But the revolutionaries weren't finished. To seal her fate, they needed one more victim. And that victim was truth itself. Her trial was never meant to uncover facts. It was meant to legitimize the execution already decided in secret meetings and inked into documents long before she saw a courtroom. But for their final blow, they needed a charge so monstrous, so unforgettable, that no part of the population could defend her. So they turned to the boy they had already broken. When the prosecutor stood in the tribunal and read the accusation, that Marie Antoinette had committed unspeakable acts with her own son, the room fell into a silence no shout could penetrate. Even the revolutionaries, who hated her more for what she represented than for who she was, shifted in discomfort. Even the crowd, hungry for spectacle, fell still. Marie Antoinette did not cry. She did not scream. She did not protest. Instead, she rose slowly, weak, trembling, but unbroken in that single instant, and spoke not to the judges, not to the men who sought her death, but to the women in the room. "I appeal to all mothers." Her voice cracked, not from fear, but from the weight of something irreparable. "Is there one among you who would not shudder at such an accusation?" For a heartbeat, she wasn't the queen they had come to condemn. She was simply a mother whose child had been turned into a weapon. And in that moment, the revolution realized what they had feared all along. Even stripped of power, she could still move hearts. The verdict that followed was inevitable. The sentence already prepared. But what the revolutionaries didn't understand was this. In trying to destroy her completely, they had revealed something they could not erase. Her humanity. The final victim was not Marie Antoinette. It was the idea that cruelty could ever silence dignity. For years after her death, France tried to bury every trace of Marie Antoinette's final months. Records were sealed. Objects disappeared. Testimonies were edited or destroyed. The revolutionaries wanted her memory to fade. Not as a queen, but as a woman who had suffered. But memory is stubborn, and history has a way of resurfacing when least expected. Decades later, long after the revolution had devoured its own leaders, whispers began circulating among archivists and collectors. Certain artifacts from the conciergerie, items that were never meant to be seen, had survived. A blood-stained chemise, a lock of white hair, a small note written by a guard describing her final night. And the most precious of all, the original 4-page letter she wrote to her sister-in-law, the one the revolutionaries intercepted and hid. These pieces weren't just relics. They were evidence, proof of what had really happened behind stone walls and silent corridors. And someone wanted them. One stormy night in the late 1800s, Paris awoke to the scandal of the century. A thief had broken into a private museum that housed confiscated revolutionary archives. But nothing of monetary value had been taken. No jewels, no gold, no coins. Only the Marie Antoinette documents. The theft was so precise, so focused, that investigators believed it had to be an insider, someone who knew exactly where the items were hid and exactly what they meant. Rumors spread that a descendant of a royalist family had orchestrated the heist, determined to recover what the revolution had stolen. Others claimed it was a historian, appalled by the lies told to the public. Some whispered it was a relative of one of the guards, seeking redemption for what his ancestor had witnessed. To this day, no one knows the truth. The thief was never found. The stolen items resurfaced only decades later, anonymously donated to a national archive, placed quietly into glass cases without explanation. Visitors walk past them now. A faded letter, a lock of hair, a tattered fabric scrap, never realizing that each artifact was once almost erased forever. And yet they survived. Hidden, stolen, rescued, preserved. Not because they belonged to a queen, but because they belonged to a woman whose suffering demanded to be remembered. The revolutionaries tried to silence her. History tried to forget her. But truth has a way of returning, even if it must be stolen back from the darkness. Marie Antoinette's story is often reduced to a single moment, a blade flashing under the Parisian sun. But the real tragedy lies not in how she died, but in how she was unmade in the days before her death. The revolution wanted to destroy a symbol, but in doing so, they revealed a woman. Not the extravagant queen critics mocked, not the foreign princess the crowds despised, but a mother, a daughter, a human being, whose suffering exposed the cruelty of an age that claimed to fight for justice. Her 76 days in the conciergerie were not the prelude to an execution. They were a mirror, reflecting what fear, power, and vengeance can turn people into. A monarchy fell. A new world rose. But in the shadows of that transformation, a woman endured a fate the guillotine could never deliver. The stripping away of identity, dignity, motherhood, and hope. And yet, in her final act, she chose grace. A whispered apology to her executioner. A steady step toward the scaffold. A final breath taken with calm purpose. The revolution wanted to make her a villain. History wanted to make her a victim. But the truth is something far more complicated and far more human. Marie Antoinette became a reminder that even in the darkest chapters of history, cruelty cannot erase compassion, suffering cannot silence dignity, and humanity can survive, even when everything else is taken. That is what they did to her before the guillotine, and why the world continues to remember. Not just how she died, but how she endured.